composition of functions, we can combine two functions to create a new function. For example, if we have the two functions, f of x and g of x, we can create a composite of those two functions, and we call that f of g of x, and it's also written as fog of x. So let's look at f of g of x, where f of x equals x squared and g of x equals 2x. We will evaluate f of g of x at x equals 2. We'll take a two-step approach. First, we'll evaluate the inner function, g of x, at x equals 2. And then we'll use the output from the first step as input for the function f, the outer function. So we do that. So g of x equals 2x evaluated at 2, and we get g of 2 equals 2 times 2 equals 4. Now we use the output of our inner function as input for our outer function. And we evaluate f of x equals x squared at x equals 4. So we have f of 4 equals 4 squared equals 16. So we find that f of g of x evaluated at x equals 2 equals 16. There's a few things to note, and one is that f of g of x is not equal to g of f of x. It could happen in some case, evaluated at some x it was the same, but in general these functions are not equal. So let's look at our examples. F of x equals x squared, g of x equals 2x, and we found that f of g of x evaluated at 2 was 16. So now let's evaluate g of f of x at 2 and see if they're the same. So let's look at g of f of x, and we evaluate that at f equals 2. So first we evaluate the inner function. In this case, the inner function is f of x, so f of 2 equals 2 squared equals 4. And we take the output of the inner function, and we evaluate the outer function at that. So g of 4 equals 2 times 4 equals 8. So g of f of x evaluated at 2 equals 8, and that is not equal to f of g of x evaluated at 2, which is equal to 16. Now, another thing to note is that the output of the inner function, or its codomain, must always be within the domain of the outer function. Now, as this is part of the definition of composite functions, we can say that the domain of f of g of x is equal to the domain of g of x. Or more generally, the domain of the composite is equal to the domain of the inner function.